Hi, everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am delighted to be talking with comics creator, I think penciler, inker, colorist, a variety of roles. You wear many hats, and that is Scott Koblish. Scott, thank you for jumping in and joining.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure to have you. I have to ask about the art on the wall behind you. Is that an artist friend? Is that yours? Is
You
that
know, that is something my wife got for us recently. This is kind of interesting. I don't know if you can see that one. These are that's my eyeball. I think that's no, that's my wife's eyeball. This is my eyeball over here.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, we had them taken just kind of for fun. There was a place in Hollywood that we were at and we were like, wow, that's kind of neat.
Yeah. It's very mandala-like.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You don't normally see like an eyeball that up close. And it's also kind of fun to sort of the patterning is very interesting. It's almost like that there's like a fold over some of the pulls. It's just fascinating to sort of see the structure of an eyeball that up close. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, lots of questions about structure, knowing the work that you do, and people out there that are listening will probably know you for work for Marvel on characters like Deadpool, Spider-Gwen. You also have work on its Halloween Party.
yes, I did some image stuff over at Image with Jerry Duggan and Brian Posehn.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, we did a character named Scotch McTiernan. Jerry wanted different names for each issue of the character, so we did little one shots. The first one was the Secret History of the War on Weed. The second one was a Halloween Party, and the third one was a Holiday Party. Um, so yeah, we had a lot of fun doing it. It was a one specific character over a series of books. So we sort of see him from his creation to the end of his life there. So it's a one trade. The trade is out now. It's called Scotch McTiernan versus the Forces of Evil. It's kind of
Love it.
fun.
Love it. Love it. And of course, there's also, I have to ask about the many deaths of Scott Koblish. So, first of all, glad you're okay. Glad that all of that's just in the book.
Yeah, that one's a fun one. That was ever since I was a little kid, I had these sort of flashes of, I think it's just because I'm sort of narratively built. I think about narrative and story and things all the time. So like whenever I would go over a bridge, like when I was a little kid, like in the back seat of the car, I would worry that the car would go over the bridge, into the water. So I would research, what to do when that happens, like you just kind of the anxiety that I felt about it was pretty real. And then I would have all these situations where I'd be walking along a lane in a pretty neighborhood and just worried that a branch was going to come down and knock me dead, so I
Mhm.
had all these anxieties that I was wrestling with, and I thought, well, what do I do, what should I do with this? And really basically it boiled down to the one thing that I do well, and the one thing that I do consistently is draw and sort of work through story. So I sort of put together like about four panels for each one of these, and in a little block, and that's so I limited myself that way, and then I limited myself so that I didn't have any dialogue. I wanted to do it all pantomime, and and I started putting them up just in my social circle, like putting them up on social media, and my friends would react, in two ways. If it was a sad story, then they would go, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Which I was fine. It was just I was working through these things. And then if it was funny, people would laugh and start to really enjoy it. Like they'd interact with it. I'd get a whole bunch of people just talking about it. And then I thought, well, this is kind of interesting because uh, it was kind of it was kind of a way to do it so that I would have, like, for instance, I took one where I sort of I'm at the ocean and I walk into the ocean, and then
Mhm.
the last panel is a quiet ocean scene. It's basically I'm gone, and that one everyone was very sad about. But and I replaced that last panel instead of a quiet ocean scene, just a it's me like being devoured by the Kraken. So it's just me going you know,
Uh-huh.
and and that one got a lot of like really, people were really engaged with it and thought it was funny. So I just started doing a whole bunch of these. And then because I work in publishing for as long as I have a whole bunch of friends that have scattered to the four winds. And one of my friends was over at Chronicle Books, and she was like, "Hey, would you like to do a book of this?" And I thought, "Yeah, that's kind of fun, you know." And I just we put together. I had already something like 40 or 50 of these before we even started the publishing concept. So I tightened them up and put a whole bunch of new ones in, and just we put it out as a book. I We got stuck a little on the title because the title was pretty great, like The Many Deaths of Scott Koblish. We just couldn't come up with something better than that. So and that was a real fun one for me. It's still available on Amazon, and I still sell it at shows. It's a great book. It's kids really seem to like it a lot.
Yeah.
Kids somewhere in between like age 8 and 16. And usually, whenever anybody picks it up, they laugh at a few, they start laughing immediately, which is really funny. It's really fun to see the reaction. When they come to my table, I kind of sort of sit back and say, well, if I get 3 laughs, that means you have to buy this book.
Nice,
So,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun one. It's a different style than I normally do for superheroes. So I have a variety of styles that I employ for different things. I've worked for Disney and Marvel and DC and heavy metal and image and things like that. And I try not to go too far afield, but I feel that if the project demands it, I try and really I follow the muse on that one. So my art style changes quite a bit from project to project. So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, what is that part of the process like of thinking about like a three or just a few panels in a comic strip versus an entire comic book or graphic novel?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, in the 4 panels, you have to have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's really important to sort of nail the idea down and cut away all the fat from it. So
Hmm.
you have to, whenever you're drawing something, the important thing is to sort of give a sense of place, a sense of time, a sense of what's happening, action and stuff like that. And no matter what it is, whether it's people sitting in a coffee shop or running away from an ogre or in medieval times, or if they're on a spaceship or you have to really establish a place. Each one of these stories have their own kind of motifs
Hmm.
and things that you sort of expect out of them. So, for instance, you can do a story about racism and the effects of like of people being particularly angry and mean to one another. But it works pretty well in science fiction. Everyone kind of expects that. Star Trek, it's something that they really dove into, and that's the predominant thing that most people think about science fiction. Like it's like a pivot point. I sort of consider Star Wars to be a little bit more into fantasy realms but Star Trek sort of has this pivot point where everybody kind of pulls around that. So that kind of narrative story is very easy to sort of jump into as far as using that kind of genre. But when you're doing a different genre, like you'll get different answers. So as to how you're handling a story. So, for instance, if it's a whole bunch of people in modern day in a coffee shop, you are going to be thinking about how the culture and different people's reactions within the culture have something to do with how you affect the story. For instance, because America is uniquely a worldwide populace have come to this country, but also that it has this polarized sort of history with slavery and a particular culture under slavery.
Hmm.
Um, there are things to think about that you wouldn't get if you were doing, say, a story set in South Africa or a story set in Kenya or something like that. There are angles of racism in within a lot of cultures. For instance, if you get like a cultural story where you're talking about the differences between South Koreans and Japanese, you're going to have a whole bunch of interesting history that you can draw upon.
Hmm.
Whereas if you had a story about someone from South Korea in the United States, you would have a different sort of story that you could land on and then explore. So each one of these genres offer you sort of a key or a pathway, a door into that really like storytelling can follow anything that you want to follow.
Hmm.
As long as you think it's interesting and as long as you think that you can get something out of it, um, then that's really the key for when you're doing a story. I find that I had a whole bunch of stories that I considered near greats. So like they would be I had a couple ideas where it would sort of just it would roll out and then I would have a couple concepts and then it would stop dead. Like there was just nothing that could come of it. Like I
Hmm.
had a character called Dr. I, which was it was I, the letter I, and then EYE, and then AYE, like so it was Dr. I, and he was a an eye doctor, and he had three eyes. He hid the third eye behind one of those silvery round things that eye doctors use.
Hmm.
So that's the way he kept his secret identity, and his secretary was named Iris and things like that. But it fell kind of dead after that. Like I didn't really have. I mean, I had a theme song, which is that I song, but like just sort of ended there. Like it never went anywhere. So I sort of consider things like that like a they just sort of end themselves. The story starts up, pops up, vanishes as soon as you've really solved whatever the things that you were thinking about.
Hmm.
And then like a situation where the many deaths of Scott Koblish, like I just kept rolling ideas out. Like I just couldn't stop them. They just kept coming out like they would just pour out. And so there's little things like that. You'll find that when you're sitting there doing narrative fiction, that the good stuff to follow is the stuff you can't stop thinking about. When
Hmm.
you have a character or a thought process. So those are the ones to follow. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
That's there, yeah.
no, that's really interesting. And I was going to ask a medium kind of question. So, uh, how are comics kind of the ideal space for the way you want to tell stories once you've decided the genre and once you have the idea?
That's an interesting idea. Yeah, so comics have a number of things that we do that are unique to comics, but borrow from every other medium that's out there. So, for instance, we don't have sound. We don't have the ability to have sound, nor do we have the ability to have an unregulated amount or a regulated amount of time. So, for instance, when someone is reading a story, they all read at their different pace, very similar to a novel in that aspect. Like everyone has a different pace of reading. So we share that with novels and with the written word in that the person reading it, they can read it at any pace that they like. It's different from film. In film, you're trapped within the confines of time. So let's say you go to a film, it's 90 minutes long. It's never going to be longer somehow. It's always going to be 90 minutes long. But when you sit down and read a novel, you can read it in pieces, you can read it in sections, you can read it over time. You can sit down. Someone will take 3 hours to read through a book, some will take six. So everyone has a different experience with the story. So comic
Mhm.
books share that with knowledge novels. So what happens for us is that we have a number of sort of breaks within the narrative that are separate from what happens in novels. So novels, you'll have paragraph breaks, or you'll have dialogue breaks. We have panel breaks. So everything is broken into panels in a comic book. There's a gutter. That's what we call it, the little white space in between and around a panel. It's
Mhm.
called a gutter. There's a gutter, and that gutter can fulfill any number of narrative tricks that we want to regarding time. So you can have a panel from one panel to the next where there's just a fraction of a second, and there's a difference between the two. So, for instance, you can have someone standing by the side of the road, and then in the next panel, they're hit by a car. Very sudden moment, very sudden movement. Or you can have the person is standing by the side of the road, and then the next panel is they're flying in an airplane.
Mhm.
So we know that there's a connection between these two panels, and it's up to the reader sometimes to sort of discern what happened, but it's also up to the person who's writing it or drawing it to figure out how to sort of combine those two panels into some sort of narrative story. So, for instance, that person was standing by the side of the road, and then they're in the airplane. You can say that this person was sort of hailing a cab, or he wanted to get onto the airplane, or he's late, or things like that, so that there is some sort of narrative tissue between the two panels. And then what's really great about comic books is because we have text and words and an image, which is very different from novels. For instance, very few novels have any sort of image put in, unless you're like reading something that like James Joyce did in Somewhat in Ulysses, or if you ever read Flatland, it's a book from the 1800s that has a whole bunch of like images. They'll sort of draw out what's happening. But those are very crude. So with comic books, you have an image, and then you have a text or a dialogue or something like that. And what you're doing is that you can juxtapose those two. So oftentimes people will ask me, what do I read first? Do I read the words or do I read the pictures? And my answer is kind of you're reading both.
Mhm.
So people have people have a focus when they're looking at something, but they also have like a visual field around that focus that your brain is actually functioning on. So you can know that, like, say, a candle is burning, but you see sort of the candle, you see the flame, you see the air around it being sort of hot and wavy. There's more to it that you're looking at when you're looking at any image or any word. So sometimes when I'm reading a book, I look, or a paragraph, I look at what I'm reading as well as the words. So I have this difficulty. I will sort of skip ahead, and I'll sort of like scan a paragraph at the same time I'm sort of reading. So like if I feel like I understand the gist of everything, I can skip to the next section in order to see if I want to read further into that whatever that paragraph's about. But when you're reading a comic book, oftentimes you're reading the words. Most people sort of start with the words, but they sort of see the action of the thing around it. And
Mhm.
sometimes they'll complete the paragraph and then look at the image. Sometimes you'll look at the image first and read the paragraph. And with those words and those pictures, you can juxtapose any sort of meaning in it that you want to. So, for instance, you can have a narrative, a caption box, sort of saying it's raining, or you can have the narrative, and then the image is that it's raining, or you can have the image is that it's raining, and the narrative box will say, another misty day with a little bit of rain, and it's sunset, and you can give it more context.
Mhm.
So you can give something more context within that image, or you can juxtapose it with a completely different thing. You could say have the person sort of thinking in a word balloon or a thought balloon. My girlfriend left me. So that it gives some sort of emotional content to the actual image. You're giving something like depth that it wouldn't normally have just as the image. So, for instance, in paintings, you'll often see like before, right around the time that the photograph was invented. Before then, people would try and put in a sort of narrative within a painting. So
Hmm.
you could either have a story about like many of the paintings, the you'll have a character like it'll be the story of Io, or it'll be the story of like some Aristotle. You'll have like a set of images where there's a or the last dinner, the last, what is it, the last supper.
Hmm.
You'll
Hmm.
have an image of the Last Supper. You'll have 13 people across the screen, essentially across the painting, and then you'll have each one of them are functioning in a different way. So, for instance, you'll have, I think it's Judas has his arm on the table and is sort of facing Jesus in that particular painting. And that's sort of there to indicate like that this person is going to, that this person will betray Jesus. The rest of them don't have their arms on the table, except for like a few other aspects of what the narration essentially of that image is trying to tell you. It gives you a place, it gives you the characters, it gives you some personality of the people, but there's no words, there's no indication of what these people are actually saying. So the advantage that we have in comics is that you can put words into those people's mouths. You can put narrative box above, giving an indication of where they are, what they're doing. You can put thought balloons in, sort of to give somebody like a secret a secret way, that they're thinking, like um, some sort of internal dialogue that isn't visible to anybody else in the table, except it's visible to the reader, so that you would know that Judas is thinking about betraying Jesus, whereas the other fellows are not. That sort of thing. Like we have an advantage that other mediums do not have. For instance, film. It's very difficult to get an internal dialogue in film. You can do it with a sort of a voiceover,
Hmm.
but that's a clumsy thing that most filmmakers avoid. You can do that. You can't really do that in plays. You can have an internal dialogue that comes out, that's explored, that's revealed. But in comics, we can do an internal dialogue, no problem. That's something that we share with novels. Novels can do an internal dialogue very easily. Novels are almost always internal dialogue. It's a form of telepathy. You're sort of reading another person's thoughts, the writer's thoughts and how they think about things. But we share that with novels, but we don't share that with film. So or plays or anything like that. So we have a number of tools in our toolbox that are they're almost useless in other media. Um, but we also have ones that other media have that we don't, like sound and the advent of time. So we in comics, it's a really exciting medium for me to sort of work in. You can play around with all sorts of stuff that just isn't available to other things, and also has limitations that sort of make you think about around a problem. I love problem solving. That's most of what I do all day long. So
Love it. Love it. Very, very well said. And I love the close look at comics and how they work.
yeah, it's because it's how I find that a lot of comics, especially in the mainstream, they have a particular way of they'll have a particular fashion. So something will come into fashion because someone nails it. Someone will
Hmm.
jump in and they'll do something that really, really turns everything on its head. Like you know, when Spider-Man came along, it was really great. You had a character who had flaws, and you
Hmm.
had a character who was really struggling with the day-to-day kind of stuff in a way that like the the comics had not been exploring before in the mainstream. And then you'll have these little periods where somebody will pick up something, and a person like Alan Moore will sit there and say, "I can juxtapose these images with not only the image that's before it, but the dialogue or the caption box within it." So a book like Watchmen was incredibly important in that everybody was able to sort of look at what's possible One of the things that Alan Moore explored, which is possible in comics but not possible in film, is that you can juxtapose two images right next to one another. So, for instance, you can have a shot of two lovers kissing, standing up, and then you can have the next shot is a wall where the imprint of their last moment on Earth after a nuclear explosion is, and it can be a
Mhm.
spray painted sort of thing on a wall that someone wanted to make a point about, or it can be actually that moment of like nuclear disintegration, and you can put all of those panels one after the other. The reader can bounce back and forth between them. So, for instance, in a film, if you were to do those three images, you would have to go bang, 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 and then each one would reference the other, but then it vanishes from your ability to take a look at it and compare them. So, but in comics, you can do that on a page very easily. A person can sort of see something happening, go back, absorb it again, and then read through it again. We have that advantage that other comics don't have. So when Alan Moore, or sorry, other medium don't have, comics have it.
Mhm.
So when a fellow like Alan Moore like lands on this and explores it, it opens up a door for everybody else to sort of pour through. So, for instance, I think people got kind of a little confused about what Alan Moore gave to comics. I think that the biggest thing is that he nailed what a lot of the things that comics do that other media don't. Um, and then you can have a moment where in the sort of like in the zeitgeist, a fellow like Brian Bendis who comes along, he loves David Mamet plays.
Mhm.
They're very terse, they're very there's no internal dialogue that's visible, but each one of the characters has a very strong motivation. And each one of the people has it's sort of a drawn out, long process of like a slow burn kind of thing. So when he started doing that, I thought that that was really interesting how he handled that in comics. But other people, I think they pick up different things from it. So at any rate, like comics always have some sort of like someone who picks up a baton of some exciting thing that comics has and then just runs with it. And I think that that's really a good way to think about the possibilities that are there for comics, and that probably what'll happen is that somebody somewhere along the line will sit back and say, what can we do here again that we can't do other places,
Mhm.
so that'll be what the next exciting thing is probably going to be. So
Yeah. Well, I'm curious by means of a last question of where you're headed in your creating, what you're tackling next, what you're interested in tackling, and where people can learn more.
yeah, that's a really good point. Well, so I've really been, it's funny. I've had a little bit of downtime. So I did a very large X-Men cover that expands across four different issues, and it has pretty much every single X-Man or character that was in the X-Men or character that appeared within the X-Men book, whether they had powers or not, or whether they were like Captain America, they were a mutant or not, just everybody that appeared that I could sort of find. And that was a really long, drawn out process. It
Hmm.
took me a couple months, about 3 months, a little more, to do not only the research, but to sort of put everybody into place and draw the thing all the way across. And that was exciting for me, in that I was able to sort of take a look at all the comics that I really loved as a kid, and then and loved as an adult, and sort of put it all in one sort of place over a period of time. But it put me in an odd headspace where I was thinking about what to do next, So I have a couple different ideas that I'm actually fleshing out. As a
Hmm.
writer, I'm new to everything. Not terribly new, but uh, oftentimes as an artist, what you're called upon to do when you're given a script is that the script will be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like it's all in place, it's all in order for you. And then your job as an artist is to sort of sit back and flesh it out so that like you'll have the story will be A through Z, but your job is to create like a B.1 or a B.2 or a D.3 or point 0.4. So essentially what's happening is that you'll set up the room, you'll set up the action. You can add little things in the background that flesh out the story. So for instance, when the narrative function sort of comes down between two people talking, let's say in a coffee shop, you can do a number of things in a situation like that that help to balance and to give the room context. So let's say you know that something's coming. Let's say that there's a villain that's going to be coming into the story. You can make it so that in the background that villain is visible. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can telegraph things. It's almost like taking something from point F and then pulling it into the story of point B. So you can do things like that, or you can flesh out that entire room. You can make it so that like they're having coffee together, and there's a chef who's like in the background, kind of like fooling around with the food that he's making, or making a big show of it, or talking to some woman who's the waitress. You can have these things where their dialogue is not visible in any way, but you can sort of read into what they're doing, so that you create some sort of element of like you can create an element of empathy, where when the villain does show up and people get hurt or injured, you know that you've seen those people before. You have some sort of element of having been part of their story, as well as the two people that are going to be involved, in the coffee, that are main characters. You can juxtapose those things that they're doing with the words that they're saying. So let's say someone says, "Oh, this coffee is terrible." You're drawing their expression. You're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what they're sort of thinking. The other person is not have that reaction. So maybe that other person doesn't care that the coffee is terrible, or doesn't see it, or doesn't feel it. So my job, oftentimes as an artist, is to sort of fill things out. But as a writer, I found that it's almost like it's something that trips me up. It makes me like I'll start to flesh out everything and then get caught up in those tiny details. So I found that I've had to kind of like strip that away, make it so that that stuff is there, that my thought process is there, but that I have some end game to get to, or some process that I'm working through, that I can get the A, B, C, D, E order properly. So that's really what I find that a lot of my days are dedicated toward, is sort of wrangling my thought process in a way that's beneficial to a storytelling, as opposed to beneficial to me as an artist working on a story.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of stuff that I do. I can be found as far as the stands is the next few issues of X-Men. I did the covers. So these are very big covers. The whole cover itself is 16 inches high by 7 feet long.
Wow.
So it's a pretty impressive thing. And then what'll happen is that it sort of connects across 4 different issues. So it's issue 700 of X-Men, which is also 35 of X-Men, because Marvel has a particular numbering system that they go by. And then it'll be the first issue of X-Men again, because they're rebooting the property. And then Uncanny X-Men #1. And then a book called Exceptional X-Men, which I'm surprised that they'd never used that adjective before,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a new one for them, Exceptional X-Men. So it's those three, they come out once a month. So I imagine I've already started signing at conventions, some of these things. Um, so that's where you can find me on the stands at the moment. In as far as conventions go, I will be at there's a Canoga Park in Los Angeles convention that I have this weekend. I have a store signing at Earth 2 this weekend as well. I don't know when this particular podcast comes out, so those might be too far away. But I'll be at San Diego convention. I'm also going to a convention in Spain around July 4th. Uh,
Nice, nice.
yeah, yeah, that should be a lot of fun. Although the travel is like a day and a half. But um, I'll be so the conventions. I appear at different conventions here and there, but you can find me online. There's a Twitter that's at Koblish. There's an Instagram that's at Scott Koblish. So if you just sort of spell out my name, you'll be able to find me there. Those are the two best places to sort of catch me. I do commissions and things like that, and oh, and I've been doing a whole bunch of really interesting sort of drawings, and I'll post them over at something called Nerd Crawler, which is kind
Oh,
of interesting. They're a really great place for artists and fans of art to sort of pick up things at a sort of auction sort of site, so you can get things for a pretty good price. Frank Cho does some of his stuff over at Nerdcrawler. I've been doing some of my stuff over at Nerdcrawler. It's really fun for me. I'll put something every week or every other week, and that's just a sort of added thing. So yeah, those are the kind of places that you can find me and interact with me. You can message me on Twitter or Instagram. I answer like once a week. I try not to let it be my main focus, but I put things up there. So yeah.
awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for the conversation. I will probably take what you said about the way comics work and make it its own video in addition to this video because that was a wonderful exploration and glad to talk with you anytime.
Yeah, sure. It's been a joy. I hope that I haven't just blundered over everything, but it's been really fun to talk to you. So thank you. The good
Fun,
questions so
great,
much.
great. Glad to hear it. Fun to talk with you as well.
Yeah.